Greetings. Welcome to Conversations with Tony Mobley. Again, greetings and welcome to Conversation with Tony Mobley. Today is June 10th, 2025. This is episode 211 of Conversation with Tony Mobley. 5 years of conversations. This conversation uses the TV broadcast software Mimo Live, and we also use Zoom. You can watch Conversation with Tony Mobley on our YouTube channel, as well as conversationswithTonyMobley.com, our website. There is showing a interactive QR code for an interactive chat. It's called Mukana. And there you can ask your question. Your question can be voted up or down. If you choose not to use Mukana, that's okay. You can ask your question in the YouTube chat. Again, you can watch Conversation with Tony Mobley on our website, conversationwithTonyMobley.com. Our guest today is Dr. Peter Smith, and we're just going to ask Dr. Smith just to say hello before we get into our conversation today.
Hello, I'm so glad to be with you, Tony.
Thank you, Dr. Smith. And so our very first question is, who is Dr. Smith? Who is Dr. Smith?
Well, I'm a retired educator who has had a very, very lucky and exciting career. The organizing focus for most of the last 50 years has been around experiential education, learning by doing. Post-secondary, I've been the founder of 2 colleges, the Community College of Vermont, which is a non-campus, community-based 2-year school, now in its 56th year, and
Wow.
California State University, Monterey Bay, which is now in its 31st year. So I had wonderful opportunities there and spent some time in politics, as we've discussed, but found that education was, shall we say, more to my liking. Spent some time at UNESCO running the education sector there and seeing
I'm just
the
going
world.
to interrupt you again.
Yes,
Go ahead and tell us what UNESCO means for
UNESCO
those who are listening.
UNESCO is the United Nations Education, Science, and Cultural Organization, responsible for those sectors of activity under UNESCO's umbrella, based in Paris with offices in every region of the world. And since I've been back from UNESCO, which is about 18 or 19 years, I've been advising institutions of higher education about the trends that are coming. I've written since I got back 3 books, and I'm just about to finish a 4th on what's happening and where's education going, where's higher education going. So I've been very fortunate in my career to have the opportunities I've had.
Can you give us just a little peek at your book that's coming out soon? Just a little peek, just a little brief kind of.
You'll find, Tony, with me being brief is hard, but the working title is The Learning Revolution: Ending Knowledge Discrimination, and the basis, the through line of the book is that we are in the middle stages of a learning revolution in which how we understand what learning is important, how to validate all learning, not just learning that happens in colleges, the experiential learning people do, how we have to bring that mainstream, what's driving the revolution in terms of the existing system not working as well as it needs to serve more people. And then the pulling forces, what are the things that are enabling this dramatic change in how we do higher and think about higher education and its relationship to employment to happen. So it's a lot of interviews with new practitioners and interviews with learners who are people who have not been able to go to school the old-fashioned way and what happened to change their lives, and then beginning to have a short conversation about the emerging outlines, if you will, of a new ecosystem of learning.
Wow.
And that's where the book ends, because the revolution, one, I don't think the revolution is ever going to be over, but the fundamental change from the way colleges operated, the way we experienced them, and the new ways that colleges and other kinds of educational activities will operate to reach more people in a fairer, more just. We really developed a caste system in this country defined by education with economic consequences, and we have a chance to do something about that.
I want to lean in just a little bit to that. And so, and I may be way off base when I say this to you, but I would be interested in what your response would be. One of the things that I have leaned into in these last few years of my life as a person who is curious about where education is going, I sort of lean into this space where, in some sense, for me, it seems as if we are, in a way, shooting ourselves in the foot. And what I mean by that is that I think that we should broaden the horizon as far as educating people throughout the world more than we have been, because I think when I say shooting ourselves in the foot, I think that there, and this is just a belief of mine, I just believe that there are people who, given the proper opportunity for education and creative skills, maybe there are the people who solve, cancer, or maybe they are able to create a different system for using energy and propulsion and all those kinds of things. And I'm just curious to what you think about that. Am I
Well,
just all
I
way off the?
no, you're spot on in my estimation. We're not shooting ourselves in the foot; we're shooting them in the foot or elsewhere, because those people with that kind of potential are largely ignored unless something very lucky and very unique happens. There are now at least 10 different types of dominant intelligence. That has been a theory and a philosophy for 50 years plus. But now we're beginning to have examples where if you, in fact, engage people around the way they make meaning of the world, and you respect their background and their culture, and you respect the learning that they bring with them, something like 75% of what we know and use every day in our jobs and in our lives, we learned outside of school. And that's research that's been done. And it's been around since the 1970s. Schools have ignored it. So one of the chapters in the book is called Smart at Home, but Dumb in School. And it goes to the fact that there are many ways to be intelligent, and we have focused on one or two or three of those ways to the detriment of people who have intelligence that manifests itself in other ways. And that then leads to learning outside of school, and that leads, because that's the only place you can, and it's real, and it's valuable, and it can be measured and validated, but we've been largely ignoring it, and that's what's changing.
Wow. Thank you
Yeah.
so much for sharing that. I just want to say to our audience, for those who are listening and watching, this is a great opportunity. Please ask your questions, because if you don't ask your questions, Dr. Smith and I would just have a great time, just the two of us. So please ask your questions. We don't know when we might have Dr. Smith back again, so it's important that you lean into your questions right now. And we do have a question from Laura Thompson. Laura Thompson, can you talk about student retention in this changing environment for higher education?
Oh, Laura, thank you. It's just a great question. I think, among other things, it's changing dramatically, and in the sense that the way we've traditionally thought about retention is how many people get to a certificate, how many people get to a degree. One, we're able to support a much more diverse array of learners in far more diverse set of learning opportunities and experiences in ways that engage them, create community, and improve retention. So there are technologies and there's a group called Near Peer I write about in my book, just marvelous, and another called Yellow Dig, where they are communities of learners that are organized in and around colleges and college courses. So there are many others, I'm sure. I'm using examples in my book. I don't for a minute mean to suggest they're the only ones. So you've got dramatic improvement in the way we can support learning and learners who are much more diverse in what they bring, what they want, where they are, and how they participate. Having said that, there's then, I think, a new standard evolving, if you will, and it's informal at this point, and I call it, our measure of quality should be to ask any learner, whether full-time, part-time, employed, and going to school on the weekends, online, hybrid, you name it. The real question is, why are you here? And then at the end, did you get what you came for? Because we have much more what I call come and go learning, where people are going to come for 2 or 3 things they want, objectives, courses, consequences, competencies, you name it, and then they're going to go away, and they're going to come back again later on. It's happening at community colleges all over the country. And because of the technologies involved, the ways that working people or, any adult or young person, how many high school students are getting college credit now through online and blended learning? So the participation patterns, your question about retention is spot on. And it applies the way we've always thought about it and how the revolution allows us to do it better. But also the revolution is going to change and bring new patterns of participation. And I think as a result, new determinations of what quality is. If I come for 3 courses to get a new job, and I get that job, then I got what I came for. And that's a success.
Absolutely.
So, hope that helps.
And just sort of leaning into what Laura, thank you, Laura, for that question. Just sort of leaning into that question, how has the pandemic affected higher education in your opinion?
Well, it's really interesting because we all know just how devastating the pandemic was. I mean, humanly, medically, economically, the whole thing. But what it did, on the other hand, was really, it represents a point in time in which, out of necessity, a use of technology that might have been much harder to come by and taken much longer to get to became necessary. And so if you think about 3 years before the pandemic and 2 years or 3 years after the pandemic, what you see is a world changing much faster. And there are those who think that is that was, if you call it, a positive side effect of what was otherwise a horrific event. I think there was another time like that I noticed, which is back in 2008, 9, 10, just after I got back from UNESCO. And all of a sudden, people may remember we had these MOOCs. In other words, Harvard and Stanford and all these famous universities were putting their courses online for free. And MIT, you name it. They weren't an educational program, but there were dozens and then hundreds of courses available to anybody who wanted to look at them. That did not represent an educational program, but it did represent a huge step in terms of legitimizing online learning, online telecommunication of content by experts, because the institutions that did it were the most prestigious institutions, if you think about prestige historically, in terms of status and privilege. Those leadership institutions were putting their courses online. And a lot of people said, oh, wow, if they can do it, must be better than I thought it was.
So
So
that was really essentially about validation
yes,
for people to recognize that if they said it's okay, then this is worthwhile doing.
well put, very well put.
Wow. Again, this is a great opportunity to ask your questions of Dr. Smith. We have a question from Monterey Bay from Dr. John Idelson. Are models of systems that let students document their learning, such as
E-portfolio.
e-portfolio?
Yep.
Yes, e-portfolios.
Um, they're coming, and I think the obstacles we face are common assumptions, common outcomes, getting a common language. But there's several instances when my book does come out in whatever form people want to use it or read it or get it. We're seeing AI enhanced ability to look at and validate and quantify the learning I've done wherever I've done it, however I've done it, to apply that learning to academic standards for advanced placement, or to apply that learning to employment standards in particular professions to see whatever gap might exist. So you see, and e-portfolios, as I understand them, becoming a document that travels with the learner throughout their life, but it's controlled, if you will, by a third party. So all of your work, your learning, your courses, your college, everything goes in there, and good and bad. And so it can be trusted as accurate because you're not the one controlling the documentation that goes into it. What's good about it, on top of that, is that it can be organized ultimately around knowledge, skills, and abilities that can be translated into credits and degrees and certificates, or simultaneously translated into job qualifications. And it can change over time. It can be enhanced. So it's a wide open area right now. We've come a long way from assessing experiential learning for academic credit using Xerox machines and paper copiers. Back in the old days at Community College of Vermont, if you wanted to assess your experience learning, the stuff you brought with you, and we did that, sometimes you could have 2 suitcases full of paper that then had to be read. Oh, it was just, it was horrific.
Wow.
Now it can be done online.
That's amazing.
Yeah.
And well, I have another question from Laura Thompson. Has the teaching to the test model in K through 12 changed what first time in college FTIC students expect from college? Do we need redefine college ready?
Oh, Laura, I'm the wrong guy to ask because I think teaching to the test is absolutely terrible and it gets the whole world backwards. And I believe that good assessment, good evaluation of learning in elementary and high school as well as college should be a learning experience in its own right and not a test. That a good evaluation, and I'll get to the second part of your question in a minute, but a good evaluation has you thinking about, yes, the content, do you know it, and what is it? But then different ways you have applied it and different ways to think about it, reflect on it, write about it. So it's much more experience-based and project-based, and you can do it with 7-year-olds. And what that does is engage the learner in the learning. And then once I've reflected and thought about something, I have a much higher likelihood of remembering it and applying it and becoming more conscious about thinking about the learning I do. So for my money, the last thing that colleges should do is change the way they organize curriculum to respond to learners who have been taught to the test. I think they should be thinking about organizing their curriculum so that it is learner engaged and that it is doing the things that call the learner out to think and act, think critically, think about social skills, think about teamwork as well as content, and to engage their learning. You can't, if you do more of the same, or quote unquote lower your standards to deal with somebody who's good at answering a test question but may not, as employers are saying, they may know the stuff but they can't do the job. And so rather than responding to that with some kind of more of the kind or some kind of transition, I would say it even deepens the need, however old the learner is, to have a more engaged curriculum and more experience-based learning.
Can you speak to the idea of training versus being educated?
Sure. I think, first of all, training is misunderstood, because I think there's much more to, we call it training, and the background of training is that it's not academic, it's something else. But in fact, it does involve other dimensions of learning. And so, yes, you're being trained how to do a job, but you're also, you're doing it real time. One of the people I interviewed for the book said, he's an older learner. He had flunked out of college twice and then went back 15 or 20 years later because he was doing really well at work, and his supervisor wanted him to get engaged in college and get promoted because she needed that for promotion. And he said, well, I'm paraphrasing here, when you learn something in the classroom, it's really, you've learned it in the abstract, the old-fashioned way. You've been taught something, and you've showed the professor, the teacher, that you know how to show him that you know something. But he said, when you learn something on the job, there's 3 dimensions to the learning. You're learning the content, you're learning behavior and the skills that come with using that content to do effective work. And so, in fact, I think whether it is training for the Peace Corps or VISTA or an apprenticeship or an internship, anytime you are in a real-time situation, and we had these examples time and again when I was at Cal State Monterey Bay, where we required service learning for a semester, not once, but twice for a degree, lower division and upper division. And what happened when learners went out and were engaged in the community in real-time work and service, one time in a culture other than the one they grew up in, another time using their major, whatever their major was, to serve the community, they came back with the 3 dimensions of learning just radiant. And many people who had said, I don't want to do this, came back and said, this changed my life. To me, there is something, apprenticeships, internships aren't, I don't want a brain surgeon who hasn't done an internship and a residency, obviously.
Right.
But you're learning more than simply how to do it well and right. You're learning how to be on a team in a surgical room, whatever or an engineering team if it's advanced engineering. There's more to it than the content, and that's my point.
Why is a conversation like we're having right now not something that is really talked about? And I genuinely want to know, because what you're sharing, I think everybody needs to hear. And why do you think a conversation like what we're having right now is not often shared?
I think I'm willing to be generous and say some of the reasons were unanticipated and the consequences. But when after World War II, look, before World War II, roughly 3 or 4% of the country was getting a college baccalaureate degree. And they were mostly white men. And then we had the war, and women went to work, and all sorts of things happened. Men went away to war, some women went away to war. Then we had the GI Bill. And what happened, what came out of, frankly, the Ivy League was what's called the meritocratic structure, which is the traditional college structure that we have had with general studies, electives, majors, minors, a hierarchy of learning, the liberal arts initially, and then moving into other occupational areas. But the core through line in the 40s and the 50s and the 60s and the 70s and the 80s and the 90s, and I think still to this day in too many cases, the through line is that we live in an information poor society. A college campus, their faculty, their labs, their libraries is the only place we can collect and organize information so that people can get that information in a way that's useful to them. And that means that we do business according to the rules of the college. What's changed is that information poor society that frankly we had until in many regards 10 years ago, and then we still have in some cases, but that has become an information rich society. And the technologies we have allow us to do things with information and content and validation of learning, recognition of learning, gap analyses, all that were unimaginable 15 or 20 years ago, let alone 30 or 40 years ago. But what you have is a hangover of colleges where faculty, I just read that, I don't know what the story is behind it, but I think it was Auburn, just removed the faculty governance system from the control of their curriculum. I don't know what's behind it. I don't know any more than the headline. But in most colleges, the faculty control the curriculum, they control the structure, they control how much is taught, when it's taught, and how you validate that it was effectively taught. And that then translates into qualifications and standards. And if you don't fit it, you're in big trouble. So I think to me the blunt answer to your question is colleges have controlled this conversation. To a certain extent, they still do, but that's what's changing. And what's changing, and one of the reasons I'm working on this book, as hard as I am, is to give examples of the revolution that is underway. And it isn't just new learning, new content, new technology. It is who can learn, how well they can learn, where they can learn. It's more inclusive, it's fairer, it has tremendous economic consequences for people who have largely been shut out of the economy as we entered this credentialed society in the 70s, 80s, and 90s, and a college degree was the way you got a job. Well, now there are going to be many more ways to get that college degree or recognition, but there's also going to be many more ways to show what you know and get a job, like a Google certificate. Many employers, most, will value a Google certificate, and they have several, over a graduate program that has a certificate that does theoretically the same thing, because they know that Google certificates work. And what they're doing, and now colleges are giving advanced standing for Google certificates, some colleges.
So is that the reason that that's important is because Google is standing behind that certificate?
Yes. And they have become a harbinger or an indicator of that kind of quality. They are not arguing anything else other than you can do the things that the certificate says you can do. I just use that as one tiny example, but what's happening is colleges are not the sole determinant any longer or definer of what learning is necessary or when it's effective or any of the rest of it. So I
Yeah, I get that. I get that. I hate to stop you, but we have a question from Clyde Lopez Waterman from Asheville, North Carolina. His question is, can you speak to the differences between educational philosophies in the United States and that of other countries? What can we learn from them, and what can they learn from us?
That's a wonderful question, and to some extent, it's really despite my time at UNESCO, that was a long time ago, and frankly, it's a little bit beyond my scope of what I'm confident. Having said that, one of the things we see in other countries is much more openness to having many more students engage in college one way or the other. At the same time, the general pattern in most countries other than ours is for there to be a ministry of education that controls colleges from the center. I think what we need to learn when it's working is how countries in Europe and elsewhere are including more people in what they're doing and how they're doing it to see if there's something to learn from them. And at the same time, what they have to learn from us is that a top-down policy management structure is going to be from a Ministry of Education in whether it's Washington, D.C. or Brussels, is going to be less and less effective. There are some wonderful examples. I mean, the British Open University started, years ago and was really the first of its kind that I was aware of. And when we were at Cal State Monterey Bay, we went to visit it, and it was just remarkable. Now that was 1998, 99, so 25, 30, 28 years ago. They were using the mail, and that at the time probably was a good way to do it. I would like to think today they got a much more technology-based application. I don't know that. And I do know that I know of people, including a relative who was teaching in the British university system and stopped because their ability to be promoted and where they worked was determined by the Ministry of Education. So they could be moved from one university to another, whether they got tenure, this, that, the other. It was not anyway locally controlled. And that's an extreme form of what I think is a valid critique of American higher education, where that authority is local or institutionally based, but it's being used to do the wrong thing the wrong way, in my estimation.
Wow. Can you talk a little bit about project-based learning in terms of how that might be helpful to high school students in preparation for college?
I'll have a very simple example that I'm making it up, but if as a high school junior, I have met my graduation requirements, and during the summer, I work with people inside and outside the high school to get a summer job that involves serious work and substantive learning. And that job could then be a curriculum, if you will. Questions about the learning could be structured around that internship, you could call it, or a job. And you could get academic credit. It could be elective credit or whatever, but you would get academic recognition in response to, in reward of the consequences of your work, your learning, and how you document that. We did this in Vermont in a different way. We had something called Do Unto Others, DUO, and we gave high school juniors a semester off of school to go work in the community. And they came back with just tremendous surge in the quality and the amount of work that they did as a rising senior and as a senior. The colleges loved it. It did not replace any major requirements, but it did involve elective credit. So to me, project like I worked on a ferry boat 4 summers in high school and college. I learned I was putting cars on and off. I was cleaning the boat. I was doing all that stuff. But I learned a heck of a lot more than that. I learned about teamwork with my other coworkers. I learned about people, the public, how to work with the public. I mean, I learned all sorts of things that were tremendously important to me, although I was less conscious of it at the time because I hadn't, at that point in my life, learned how to reflect on my experience and see what I was learning from it. I think of reflection, and then I'll be quiet. Reflection is is the process of extracting meaning from experience. Something happens to me. I do something, and that's and it could be good or bad. Oftentimes we learn more from our mistakes than we do our successes. But then I have the ability. School helps me, and college helps me learn how to think. Why did that happen? What did I have to do with it? How am I different as a result of having been this happened to me? So I'm able to be more conscious of the impact of my experience on me in substantive ways.
I think one of the things that young people now are wrestling with is this idea of not wanting to fail. And it's based on what you just said. I see that as possibly a failing of us from the standpoint that we have generated this idea that they can't fail. But when I look at my own life, I know that it's majority of the failures that have pushed me forward in terms of, my life. And so I just wanted to know what you thought about that.
Learning from failure is one of the most important things you can do. One of the colleges I write about in the book is College Unbound. And it's a very, very interesting place. Their home base is in Rhode Island, but they now have units all over the place. And it's a community-based college. And one of the things they require of their learners is to think through failures in their lives. And these are late people returning to college late, all that kind of thing. So older students, and it's an important part of their curriculum. It's a requirement. I know in my case that in anybody who is asked to think about it is going to find things that didn't work out quite as well as they hoped they would. So it's it's a very very important point you're making, and I think that's it should be an active part. Then when you talk about actual learning projects,
Do we need to push the idea it's okay to fail? It's all right.
well, I'm not sure I put it that way, but yes, to say failure happens. Like one college student in Monterey who he came up to me the first year, second year and said, "You can't make me do service learning." And I said, "Oh, sure I can. And it's a requirement and you're going to do it." And it was and a year later, he grumbled and walked off. About a year later, he came up to me and he said, "Thank you for service learning. It changed my life." And what he had had as an experience was that he had not gone to his service learning one week. And when he came there, he was working with a bunch of senior citizens and reading to them and helping them solve problems. 3 of them cried and said, "Please don't ever do that again."
Oh, wow.
And he said, "Why?" And they said, "Because this is the most important thing we do." And he looked at me and he said, "Nobody ever needed me before." Tony, I'm going to have to step away for 30 seconds. I'll be right back, and maybe you can do a little talking in the meantime.
Okay, I can do that.
I apologize.
Can do that. No problem. And so, again, we want to thank those of you who have asked questions. This is a great opportunity to ask Dr. Smith additional questions. We want to thank Laura Thompson and we want to thank Clyde Lopez Waterman, Dr. Ivelson, who have already asked questions. Um, Please continue to ask your questions, and we are just going to just really want to thank Dr. Smith again for being able to be with us tonight and share his knowledge. And when he comes back, we're going to talk a little bit about his political career. Unless we're going to have, we're going to talk a little bit about his political career when he comes back. And unless you have some additional higher education questions that you want to ask him, we're going to ask that you ask those questions right now. Put them in YouTube chat or put them in Mukana so that we can continue this great conversation. I'm just going to take a quick look. We have about 20 minutes left. And so we only have 20 minutes left for this conversation. And we're going to ask that you please put your questions in. And we're just really going to do a rapid question and answer period for these last 20 minutes. And so we want to make sure that you, and also we want to let you know that you need to stay on the lookout for when Dr. Smith's book comes out so that you can be first in line and to do that pre-order for his book. And so fantastic.
And find out.
That's fantastic. And so thank you so much for returning. And we're going to lean in a little bit on the political part of, can you talk a little bit about how those political opportunities that you have informed your higher education journey?
Sure. First of all, in terms of elective office, I served at the town level in Vermont. I served in the state Senate. I served as lieutenant governor, and I served as Vermont's lone member of Congress for one term. That occupied about 10 years of my life. Now, it was 35, 40, God forbid, years ago. So things, to put it mildly, have changed. But I, at the time, as you're thinking about a policy change in higher education or changing your practices, and if you're a public institution especially, knowing the chemistry and the dynamics of the politics in the legislature and between your board and the legislature and governor is critically important. And what I learned in a nutshell, and I had a positive and a negative experience, two very different issues. When we started the Community College of Vermont, we were not part of the system. We had a little bit of federal money. We had this idea of a community-based non-campus college, which it is to this day. And today it serves 10,000 students last year all over Vermont, which was, I believe, more than all the other public universities and the state university combined. But when we started, there was nothing else that looked like it that we could find in the country. So we just got some teachers and learners and started. Okay. 2 years later, we joined the state college system because there was permissive legislation, but we had to, as part of that, get their vote. Then we had to go to the legislature. And there were legislators that just thought this was a terrible idea because it looked so different and low quality and, all of that. So they had a hearing and we had a budget, and it was proposed that it be cut by the House Appropriations Committee. And they had a hearing one night, and something like 600 people came from all over the state of Vermont. After working all day to jam the State House and the House chamber and say, we want this college. If we had not had that example, and the legislature then voted 130 maybe to 20 or something to keep the budget. If we had not had that real-time example, that was my lesson. Having a pilot project, having a real-time example, when you're doing something that is for people possibly unimaginable because they've never seen anything like it, having an example is really powerful. And I think in contemporary terms, trying to understand the multiple ways that AI can help us and hurt us when it is something that is so new that most of us don't have a real understanding. I mean, how do you regulate something you don't understand? And how much is too much and how much is not enough? I think and now the examples are coming, and I think that will lead to some ability there. So and I took some positions in the Congress, and I won't go into it, but I lost my job because I came out in favor of banning AK-47s and AR-15s. Well, the NRA didn't like that. That's their right. But I didn't have an example. It was a philosophical question, and
Right.
and that that was one of the reasons I lost, quite frankly, and that was okay with me. I believed in what I did, and I wasn't going to change my mind. But as I thought about it against the community college example, I realized if I could have had a pilot project to show, and subsequently the Clinton administration did pass a bill, and it did result in tremendous reduction of death and harm by firearms. But even that wasn't enough, and the bill was repealed after 5 years. So, but that's the kind of learning that was there for me.
Absolutely. The next question is, in today's climate, higher education and government seems more at odds than ever. From your experience on both sides, what do each misunderstand about the other?
Well, let's start with a caveat that both sides have some right and some wrong, okay? Whether I agree with the motives of some people in government criticizing higher education or not, there are examples in higher education where things have happened that probably shouldn't have happened. And ditto the other way around. But I think what it comes down to in my mind is that it's like the separation of church and state. We want the state, so-called, to be separated from the educational process, whether it is K-12 or higher education. We want, in my mind anyway, we want those sectors to be overseen by peer groups and peers who can understand when something bad is happening, and at the same time invoke and rely on standards and expectations that are appropriate. It's just, and I used to say in politics, reasonable people can disagree. And in some cases, maybe some unreasonable people can disagree too. But I really, I think there are certain things, and it's like, do you want the government controlling healthcare and telling you what healthcare you can get and what healthcare you can't? Is there a role for research and medicine to determine what are good treatments and what are not, what are effective and what are not, what are dangerous and what are not? But you don't want a government telling you at the end of the day, you want scientists doing it. And people who know. So I think that what we're seeing is an attack coming on higher education on those levels, and that's on education in general. I happen to think that public financing of private schools falls into that. I mean, I think public education, for all its flaws, is one of the core, along with what was the military draft, except nobody remembers that, except guys like you and me, because it's been gone. But there were some core experiences in American education that tied this society together. And I think uh, public education and public universities, in whatever form they take, are key to that. And I would agree with public charter schools. Some people don't like them, but they are admissions blind, when they're done right. But I really think, you know, the the sort of blending or the lessening of the gap or the chasm between free speech and state control of speech, those kinds of things, I think, are very important to keep clear in education. And if a school isn't doing its job, it'll go out of business. Or if a school is serving a market that it isn't serving well, it'll go out of business. Um, what you want is to protect people from fraud and protect people from claims about what can happen to them, which may very well not be accurate.
Can I push back just a little bit?
Sure.
So what if um, a university has made the decision that they're going to go after a group of students that may not necessarily be important to, let's say, a particular state. And so, because this university is targeted toward a minority group, um, it goes out of business because not because the students aren't gleaning a positive learning experience, not because they are gaining a lot of skills, but because the state has made the decision that they want to stop spending state money to keep that school in existence. I'm just
Uh,
curious to.
oh, it's funny. I don't see that as a pushback at all. I agree. And the fact of the matter is that if there is a university system in one of the, or college system in one of the colleges uh, is doing everything qualitatively appropriately by any standard, the idea that for a political reason you would intervene and close them, I think, is outrageous. And it's is the way it happens today perfect? No, but the fact of the matter is that making a determination, I would take it even farther within a college. If you have a group of students who are protesting on a regular basis against an event, uh, could be, for example, a war in the Middle East, just to pick one. Um, their right to do that must be protected. At the same time, if their inclination is to be violent, destroy property, block people from their daily path in life, to me, that's where you got to draw the line, and
Okay.
that's up to the college to do. It's not up to, or if necessary, a court of law, uh, but it's not up to the government.
Okay. Okay. I accept that. Thank you so much for for allowing me to do that. You said it wasn't a pushback, and so I accept it as not being a pushback. Um, as a person who has graduated from a historically black college, um, I am concerned when I hear that there is a desire to stop funding those institutions, and I'm really concerned about it because I cannot explain or even get anybody to understand the value it has had for me and my life. And just the idea that some of them may go out of existence because there are people who don't believe that they have any value anymore, that they are not necessary. So I was just wondering what you thought about
Well,
that.
the fact of the matter is, and it's something that some groups are just at best or most kindly uncomfortable with, and at worst are simply don't like, I disagree with for whatever reasons. Um, but the fact of the matter is that colleges, you have Catholic colleges, you have other religious colleges, you have historically black colleges and universities, public and private, and each of them has a community that it's serving predominantly, and that community is a community of support and reflection and depth. And having that kind of diversity, in my mind, whether it is access to Pell Grants and student loans because it's a private college, or it is access to state appropriations, which are increasingly under pressure all over the place. I was reading today, I think the University of Michigan is down to 6% state funding. So there's that problem in addition, but the idea that you cannot have a system with institutions serving diverse populations, as well as with any institutions having diverse populations in other circumstances, it works both ways. And what's important to me is the sense of belonging and community and engagement. And what we know for a fact is that poorer populations, populations of color, populations of otherness, have immigrants, you name it, have felt not at home or engaged disproportionately. And that is reflected in the success rates of our existing colleges and universities. And then when you look at places that have worked on that, Morgan State, Morehouse, it's a very different story in that case, or religious schools. Whether I agree with the religion or not is a different, that's not material. So an accreditation should take care of the question of qualitative studies, even the kind that I'm arguing should change. Having that done by peers according to rules that are not political or governmental is critical.
Thank you so much for that. I appreciate that.
Well,
Again, we're winding down, and if you have a question, we're going to ask that you please submit your questions in these last few minutes that we have. We actually don't have a lot of time left. I thought we had more time than we actually do. So we're really down to the last question. You're speaking to the world. What do you want the world to know, Dr. Smith?
I want the world to know that your entire life lived experience is a learning experience. College is part of that if you go to college, but everything you do, everything that happens to you from the youngest age on, but starting around 14, 15, 16, you become more conscious of it. And it can be the good, it can be bad, it can be ugly. I've talked to people who were horribly mistreated by their parents, but understood it for what it was at some point and then built on it, built beyond it, learned from it about what they wanted to do, who they wanted to be, and how they wanted to proceed. So if life is riding a motorcycle, education is not the sidecar, and you jump in the sidecar and ride along for a while. The motorcycle ride from day one is a learning experience. And the challenge we all have is to learn from that and learn how to learn from that. And that's where I think colleges and schools need to go.
Wow. Fantastic. Thank you so much, Dr. Smith.
Thank you, Tony.
I want to make you laugh. I wrote down a couple of things as we were talking today, and we did not get to those things that I wrote down today. So we definitely have to have you back soon, so that we can
Anytime.
continue this conversation. You can watch Conversation with Tony Mobley on YouTube, or you can watch it at conversationwithtonymobley.com. Conversation with Tony Mobley is produced by Clylock Lopez Waterman. Our current team includes Laura Thompson, Zachary Sorensen, Mickey McAture. We want to say thank you, sir. Thank you, team. When I say thank you, sir, I'm saying it to my producer, Clyde Lopez Waterman. Somebody might be wondering, he said, thank you, sir. Who is he saying thank you, sir, to? So I'm saying thank you, sir, to Clyde Lopez Waterman, and I want to say thank you, team. Thank you, Mimo Live. Thank you, Zoom, for making this broadcast possible. We have conversations with real people. Stay tuned for new episodes and great conversations with Conversation with Tony Mobley. When you have time, we ask that you go back and look at the over 200 episodes of Conversation with Tony Mobley. We think that you might find something that you like, and hopefully it is helpful to you. Again, Conversation with Tony Mobley wants to thank Dr. Peter Smith. Thank you for being part of our conversation today, for doing the work you do, and for being the person who you are. Next week, we're going to have another conversation with Gary B. Jr., the free show evangelist. And we're also going to be talking about some notes he has for houses of worship. Please feel free to donate your time, your talent, and or your financial gift. We are committed to continuing to get better, and your support makes that possible. We also love to have you join our growing community. Like, subscribe, comment on YouTube so that we can continue to bring you more meaningful conversations. Here at Conversation with Tony Mobley, we believe that when people sit down and truly talk, something powerful happens. So consider having a conversation today. It just might change everything. We want to say, take care. God bless you. See you soon. Bye-bye.